Dr. Elias Vance sat in the worn leather seat of his vintage Mercedes. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the windshield, a calming counterpoint to the dull ache blossoming in his lower abdomen. The late afternoon light filtered through a canopy of ancient oaks painted the suburban street in muted greens and grays, a stark contrast to the sterile, fluorescent glare he knew awaited him. He wasn't in his usual crisp scrubs, nor the tailored suits he wore for hospital board meetings. Today, he was just Elias, a man in a faded denim jacket, a simple white t-shirt, and a pair of well-worn polished boots that had seen more dusty clinic floors in remote villages than marble hospital lobbies. He'd just landed from a grueling humanitarian trip. The jet lag, a heavy cloak, and this sudden sharp pain was an unwelcome, insistent guest. He took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of damp earth and old leather filling his lungs. Trying to push away the rising tide of unease, he was a doctor. He knew the signs, and this felt urgent. The car idled, a low hum, as he stared at the familiar, imposing facade of St. Jude's Medical Center, a place he knew intimately, yet felt utterly foreign to him in this moment of vulnerability. A sudden violent spasm seized him, doubling him over, a gasp escaping his lips. The calm shattered, replaced by a cold dread that tightened its grip around his chest. He had to go in. Now, he pushed open the heavy glass doors, the automatic whoosh of air conditioning, a frigid shock against his skin. The emergency room waiting area was a cacophony of muffled coughs, hushed conversations, and the insistent beeping of unseen machines. Every seat was occupied, a mosaic of human suffering and impatience. A young mother rocked a wailing infant. An elderly man clutched his chest with a pale, trembling hand. And a teenager with a bandaged head stared blankly at a flickering television screen. Elias moved with a practiced, almost invisible grace, his eyes scanning the room, assessing, categorizing, a habit ingrained from years of triage. He approached the reception desk, a high, imposing barrier of frosted glass and polished chrome. Behind it, a woman with tightly pulled back blonde hair and a name tag that read, "Brenda Triage Nurse," spoke into a headset, her voice a clipped monotone. Her uniform, stark white and impeccably pressed, seemed to amplify the coldness in her eyes as they flicked up to him, then quickly dismissed him. "Next," she called out, her gaze already drifting to the next person in line, a woman clutching her arm. Elias, still reeling from the latest wave of pain, stepped forward. "Excuse me, nurse," he began, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "I'm experiencing severe abdominal pain. I believe it might be acute appendicitis, or perhaps diverticulitis. I'm a physician, and I'd appreciate it if I could be seen as soon as possible." He tried to keep his tone neutral, professional, devoid of any hint of entitlement. Despite the urgency he felt, Brenda's eyes, a glacial blue, finally settled on him, moving slowly from his worn boots to his denim jacket, lingering on his dark skin, then flicking back to his face with a barely perceptible sneer. A silence, thick and heavy, fell over the immediate vicinity of the desk, as if the usual hum had suddenly been muted, leaving only the distant wail of a siren. "Sir," Brenda said, her voice dripping with an almost theatrical condescension, "everyone here is experiencing pain, and everyone here wants to be seen as soon as possible. You'll fill out the forms like everyone else and wait your turn. Your profession doesn't get you a fast pass." She emphasized the word profession with a dismissive wave of her hand, as if it were a flimsy excuse. Her gaze hardened, a clear message in her eyes. "You are just another patient, and not a particularly important one." Elias felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in his stomach, a feeling he knew well from a lifetime of similar microaggressions. But today, compounded by the throbbing pain, it felt like a physical blow. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Understand, nurse, but my symptoms are quite acute, and given my medical background, I'm concerned about—" "Are you bleeding?" she interrupted, her voice sharp, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Are you having trouble breathing? Is your arm hanging off? No, then you'll wait. There are people here with actual emergencies." Her eyes scanned the waiting room, pointedly ignoring him, before landing on a young boy in a faded wheelchair near the far wall. The boy, perhaps 8 or 9, had a thin, almost translucent quality to his skin and his left leg. Encased in a bulky brace was twisted at an unnatural angle. He was quietly drawing in a small notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around him. Brenda's gaze lingered on the boy for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before she turned back to Elias with an air of finality. She barked, her voice echoing slightly in the sudden, uncomfortable stillness. Elias felt the humiliation wash over him, a hot flush that had nothing to do with his pain. He was a doctor, a surgeon, a man who had saved lives in war zones and performed delicate operations under the most trying circumstances. And here, in his own hospital, he was being dismissed, reduced to an anonymous, inconvenient face in a crowd. He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of holding scalpels and comforting frightened patients, now trembling slightly. He clenched them into fists, fighting the urge to argue, to demand, to pull rank. But that wasn't his way. His strength had always been in quiet resilience, in proving himself through action, not assertion. He took the clipboard she thrust at him, the forms a blur of bureaucratic jargon, and turned away. The weight of her disdain, a palpable burden on his shoulders. He found an empty chair near the boy in the wheelchair, the plastic cold and unyielding beneath him. He sank into it, the pain in his abdomen intensifying, a dull, persistent throb. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to recenter himself, to breathe through the discomfort, to remember the countless times he had faced adversity with quiet dignity. When he opened his eyes, the boy in the wheelchair was looking at him, his large, intelligent eyes curious and unafraid. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the boy's lips. Elias offered a small, tired smile back. "What are you drawing?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. The boy Leo held up his notebook. It was a fantastical landscape, a sprawling city of towering spires and intricate bridges, all rendered with surprising detail for a child his age. "It's Neo-Kyoto," Leo whispered, his voice thin but clear. "It's where I go when I'm waiting. It's fast there, no waiting." Elias nodded, a pang of empathy striking him. He knew that feeling, the desperate need for escape when reality became too heavy. He remembered his own childhood, spent in crowded, underfunded clinics, waiting for hours with his grandmother, her quiet strength a beacon in the dim, chaotic rooms. He remembered the stories she would tell him, weaving worlds of wonder to distract him from the harsh realities of their lives. He spent the next hour filling out the forms, his hand cramping, the pain a constant companion. He watched the ebb and flow of the ER, the hurried movements of nurses and doctors, the anxious faces of families. He saw Brenda, efficient and brisk, but always with that underlying current of impatience, that subtle dismissal of anyone who didn't fit her preconceived notions of urgency or importance. He noticed how she spoke to a well-dressed woman with an expensive handbag, her tone noticeably softer, more accommodating. The contrast was stark, a silent testament to the unspoken. Hierarchies that permeated even a place meant for healing. He thought of his own journey, from a small, impoverished community where medical care was a luxury, to the hallowed halls of Johns Hopkins, then to the operating theaters, where he wielded a scalpel with precision and compassion. It all the overt racism, the subtle biases, the quiet assumptions based on skin color or perceived status. He had learned to navigate it, to rise above it, to let his work speak for itself. But sometimes, in moments of vulnerability like this, the old wounds still throbbed. A young resident, fresh-faced and earnest, hurried past, his eyes wide with the stress of the ER. Elias recognized him, Dr. Chen, a promising intern he'd lectured to just last month. Chen glanced at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but Elias quickly looked away, not wanting to draw attention. Not yet. He wanted to see how this played out, to observe the system from the other side. As a patient, not a doctor. He wanted to understand, truly understand, what it felt like to be invisible. The pain sharpened again, a searing, twisting sensation that made him gasp, his hand flying to his abdomen. Leo, who had been quietly sketching, looked up, his eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Elias nodded, gritting his teeth. "Just a little stomachache," he managed, trying to reassure the boy. Brenda at the desk finally called his name, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Vance, Elias." Scuffed linoleum floor, a stark contrast to the hurried squeak of medical shoes around him. Room 3 was a small, curtained-off cubicle, stark and impersonal. A gurney with a thin paper sheet awaited him. He carefully climbed onto it, the coldness seeping through his clothes. He lay there, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the ER, the distant cries, the hurried footsteps, the constant low hum of life and death. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The pain pulsed, a relentless drumbeat in his side. He tried to focus on his breathing, on the intricate patterns of the ceiling tiles, anything to distract himself. Leonie, he had just left the makeshift clinic under a tarp. The grateful faces of the people he had helped, the simple dignity of their lives. He thought of the young woman he had operated on, her life hanging by a thread, her family's silent, prayers filling the humid air. Here, in this sterile modern facility, he felt a profound sense of disconnect. Finally, the curtain rustled, and Brenda appeared, a clipboard in her hand, her expression as impassive as ever. She didn't make eye contact. "So, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice flat, "what seems to be the problem?" "Still just a stomachache." Her tone implied he was exaggerating, a hypochondriac wasting her valuable time. "Nurse, as I explained, I have acute abdominal pain." He used the precise medical terminology, hoping it would convey the seriousness of his condition, hoping it would cut through her dismissiveness. Brenda scribbled something on her clipboard, her pen scratching loudly in the silence. "Look at him, right? And you're a physician, you said." The skepticism in her voice was unmistakable, a thinly veiled insult. "Where did you get your medical degree, Mr. Vance?" "From a Cracker Jack box," she chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Elias felt a fresh wave of anger, cold and sharp, but he suppressed it. He had faced far worse. He had faced open hostility, outright racism, and systemic injustice. This was just a small, bitter taste of what many patients, especially black patients, experienced daily. He looked at her, truly looked at her, past the uniform, past the hardened facade, trying to find a flicker of humanity. Then that her behavior wasn't just about him, it was about something deeper, something broken within her. "Nurse Brenda," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "I understand you're busy, but this is urgent. I need a proper examination and imaging. If this is appendicitis, time is of the essence." He paused, then, with a sigh, reached into the inner pocket of his denim jacket. His fingers closed around the smooth, cool metal of his hospital ID badge, and it was a habit to keep it with him, a small anchor to his professional identity. He pulled it out slowly, deliberately, the plastic glinting under the harsh fluorescent light. Brenda's eyes, which had been fixed on her clipboard, finally lifted, drawn by the movement. Her gaze fell upon the badge. Her eyes widened, a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition, and finally, a profound, sickening realization. The badge, clearly visible, displayed his full name, Dr. Elias Vance, Chief of Surgery. Below his name, a small official photograph showed him in his scrubs, a serious, competent expression on his face. The hospital logo, St. Jude's Medical Center, was emblazoned prominently on her face, which had been flushed with irritation, drained of all color, turning a ghastly ashen white. Her jaw went slack, and the clipboard slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly onto the linoleum floor. The sound echoed in the small cubicle, a stark punctuation mark in the sudden, absolute silence. Her breath hitched, a small, strangled sound. Her eyes darted from the badge to his face, then back to the badge, as if trying to reconcile the image of the disheveled, unimportant patient with the undeniable authority of the chief of surgery. The arrogance, the condescension, the dismissive tone, it all evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked terror. "Dr. Vance," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a stark contrast to her earlier booming commands. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of disbelief and horror. The realization of her egregious error, of the profound disrespect she had shown to a man of such stature, hit her with the force of a physical blow. Elias simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, a quiet power emanating from him that had been masked by his humble attire and his patient demeanor. He just waited, the pain in his side a constant, burning reminder of her neglect. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Brenda stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, utterly exposed and vulnerable. Elias finally broke the silence, his voice still quiet but with an edge of steel. "Nurse Brenda," he said, "I believe I just told you I have acute abdominal pain. I also mentioned my medical background. Now, are you going to get me a full workup, or should I find someone who will?" His words were not a threat, but a statement of fact. A calm assertion of his professional needs and his patient rights. Brenda snapped into action, a flurry of panicked apologies tumbling from her lips. "Oh, Dr. Vance, I am so sorry I didn't. I had no idea, ... Please, forgive me. I'll get Dr. Chen immediately. We'll get you scanned right away. Anything you need, Dr. Vance, anything at all." Her voice was frantic, desperate, a complete reversal from her earlier disdain. She stooped to pick up the fallen clipboard, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She fumbled with the pen, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold it. Elias watched her. A sense of weary resignation settling over him. This wasn't about revenge or satisfaction. It was about the systemic issues, the biases, the assumptions that led to such moments. He had seen it countless times, not just directed at him, but at countless others, who didn't fit the mold, who didn't present as important enough. "Nurse Brenda," he said, his voice softening slightly, "it's not about me. It's about every patient who walks through these doors regardless of their clothes, their skin color, or their perceived status. Every patient deserves respect, and every patient deserves to be heard." A powerful lesson delivered without anger, her eyes, still wide with shock, filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She turned and practically ran from the cubicle, her usual brisk walk replaced by a stumbling haste. Moments later, Dr. Chen, looking flustered and apologetic, appeared, followed by a team of nurses and technicians. "Dr. Vance, oh so incredibly sorry, sir, Nurse Brenda just informed me. We'll get you to CT immediately. What can we do for you?" Chen's concern was genuine, his respect palpable. Elias simply nodded, allowing them to take over, the pain now a dull roar in his side. As they wheeled him out of the cubicle, he caught a glimpse of Brenda, standing by the reception desk. Devastated, a woman stripped bare of her professional facade, confronted with the ugly truth of her own biases, the CT scan confirmed his suspicion. Acute appendicitis, severe and inflamed. He was rushed to surgery. The operation, performed by a colleague and friend, Dr. Anya Sharma, went smoothly. He was wheeled into recovery, groggy but relieved. The next morning, he awoke to the gentle hum of the recovery ward. The pain was dull, manageable. He looked out the window, the city waking up under a clear, crisp sky. A knock on the door, soft and hesitant. She was no longer in her crisp uniform, but in plain clothes, looking small and vulnerable. "Dr. Vance," she began, her voice trembling, I am truly, deeply sorry." Her voice broke, and a tear traced a path down her cheek. She held out the flowers, her hand shaking. Elias looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the genuine remorse, the raw vulnerability. He saw a woman who had been humbled, who was grappling with the consequences of her actions. He remembered the exhaustion in her eyes, the cynical weariness. He knew that the ER was a brutal place, that nurses were often overworked, underpaid, and constantly under immense pressure. He didn't excuse her behavior, but he understood the context. "Brenda," he said, his voice gentle, "thank you for coming. I appreciate your apology. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." He reached out and took the flowers. Their simple beauty a stark contrast to the sterile room. "The ER is tough," he continued, "but it's no excuse for treating anyone with less than dignity. We all have a responsibility to see the human being behind the symptoms, behind the clothes, behind the color of their skin." She nodded, tears still, flowing freely. "I know," she whispered. "I've been thinking about it all night, about how many times I've done that, how many people I've dismissed. It's a hard truth to face." She paused, then looked up at him, her eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding. "My son, he has a rare genetic disorder. He's been in and out of hospitals his whole life. We've been dismissed, ignored, treated like a burden by so many medical professionals. I think I let that bitterness, that frustration, turn me into the very thing I hated." Her confession hung in the air, a raw, painful truth. Elias felt a surge of empathy. He understood. He remembered the little boy, Leo, in the waiting room, his quiet dignity amidst the chaos. He remembered the countless families he had seen, struggling with chronic illness, navigating a complex, often impersonal healthcare system. "I'm sorry to hear about your son Brenda," Elias said, his voice soft. "That's a heavy burden to carry, but it doesn't give us permission to inflict that pain on others. It should, if anything, make us more compassionate." He looked at the wildflowers in his hand, then back at her. "You have a chance to change that, Brenda, to be the kind of nurse your son deserves to encounter, the kind of nurse every patient deserves." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I will, Dr. Vance, I promise. I'm going to do better. For you, for my son, for every patient." She lingered for a moment, then, with a final choked thank you, she turned and left, her shoulders still shaking, but with a new, fragile determination in her step. Days later, Elias was discharged. He spent his recovery at home, surrounded by his books and the quiet solitude he cherished. He thought often of Brenda and of Leo, the quiet boy in the waiting room. He wondered how they were doing. He knew the incident had been a profound moment for Brenda, a mirror held up to her own biases, and he hoped she would truly transform. A week later, he was back at the hospital, not in his scrubs, but in a crisp suit, attending a board meeting. As he walked through the gleaming corridors, he noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Nurses seemed more attentive, receptionists more welcoming. He wondered if it was his imagination, or if the ripple effect of his experience had begun to spread. He stopped by the ER just to observe. Brenda was at the triage desk. She looked different. Her movements were still efficient, but there was a softness in her eyes he hadn't seen before. She was leaning over the desk, speaking to an elderly woman in a threadbare coat, her voice low and kind. She wasn't just processing paperwork. She was listening, truly listening, her hand gently touching the woman's arm. Elias watched, a quiet satisfaction spreading through him. He saw the woman's face relax, a flicker of trust replacing the anxiety. It was a small moment, but significant. Then he saw Leo. The boy was in the waiting room again, this time with his mother. He was still in his wheelchair, still drawing, but his face held a brighter, more hopeful expression. Brenda, seeing him, walked over, her face softening into a genuine smile. She knelt down, eye level with the boy. "Hey, Leo," she said, her voice warm. "How's Neo Kyoto today? Any new buildings?" Leo looked up, his face lighting up. He showed her his drawing, and Brenda genuinely admired it, asking questions, engaging with him. It was a stark contrast to the dismissive nurse he had encountered just days before. Elias felt a lump form in his throat. This was the transformation he had hoped for. Later that day, a hospital-wide email was circulated, announcing a new patient dignity initiative spearheaded by the hospital board and, notably, by Dr. Elias Vance. It outlined new training protocols for all staff, emphasizing compassionate care, unconscious bias awareness, and active listening. It was a direct response to the incident, a silent acknowledgement of the systemic issues that needed addressing. A few months passed. Elias was back in the full swing of his surgical duties, his days filled with complex operations and demanding meetings. One evening, he found himself at a grand charity gala, hosted by the hospital's most prominent benefactor, Mr. Arthur Sterling, a billionaire known for his philanthropy and his formidable, often cold, demeanor. The ballroom was a dazzling spectacle of crystal chandeliers, silk gowns, and expensive watches glinting under the soft lights. Elias, in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, felt a familiar disconnect from this elite world. A world of private ceremonies and luxury speeches, so far removed from the dusty clinics and crowded ERs, where he truly felt at home. He saw Mr. Sterling, a man whose wealth could buy anything but, Elias suspected, true peace, holding court with a group of influential donors. As the evening progressed, Mr. Sterling took the stage, his voice booming through the opulent hall. He spoke of the hospital's achievements, its commitment to excellence, its future vision. Then, unexpectedly, he paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd, finally settling on Elias. "And tonight," Mr. Sterling announced, his voice dropping slightly, "I want to acknowledge a man who embodies the very spirit of St. Jude's, a man who, through his quiet strength and unwavering dedication, reminds us all of what truly matters. In healthcare, a ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Elias felt a sudden, uncomfortable spotlight on him. Just a few months ago, Sterling continued, Dr. Elias Vance, our esteemed chief of surgery, found himself on the other side of the medical divide. As a patient, and in that moment, he experienced firsthand the challenges, and yes, the sometimes painful realities that our patients face. A hush fell over the room. Elias felt a prickle of unease. He hadn't wanted this story to become public, not in this way. But Sterling was not one for subtlety. Dr. Vance, despite his own considerable pain, displayed remarkable dignity and grace. He reminded us that compassion, empathy, and respect are not privileges, but fundamental rights for every individual who seeks healing. His experience has ignited a profound shift within our institution, leading to our new Patient Dignity Initiative. Sterling's eyes met Elias's, a rare flicker of genuine emotion in their depths. Dr. Vance, please stand. Elias, caught off guard, slowly rose from his seat. The entire ballroom turned to face him. A moment of profound, almost reverent silence descended, broken only by the soft rustle of silk and the distant clinking of glasses. Then a single person started to clap. Then another. And then the entire room erupted in a thunderous applause, a wave of admiration and respect washing over him. It was a moment of public admiration, born from a private humiliation, a testament to silent dignity being respected. He stood there, accepting the applause, not for himself, but for the countless patients whose voices were rarely heard, for the quiet strength of those who endured, and for the possibility of change later that week. Elias was walking through the hospital lobby when he saw Leo again, this time with his mother and a physical therapist. Leo was taking hesitant, assisted steps with the help of a walker, his face a mask of concentration. Brenda was there too, off duty, but cheering him on. That's it, Leo, you're doing great. Just a little further, she encouraged, her voice full of genuine warmth. Leo stumbled, and Brenda quickly knelt, her hand steady in his arm. He looked up at her, a small, grateful smile on his face, as Elias watched Leo with a burst of unexpected energy. Let go of the walker and took 2 wobbly steps towards Brenda, then threw his small arms around her neck in a spontaneous hug. Brenda, surprised, hugged him back tightly, her eyes welling up. It was a child's hug that melted an old heart, a testament to the power of kindness and connection. Elias felt a profound sense of peace. He saw the transformation in Brenda, not just in her professional demeanor, but in her very spirit. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a healer, a compassionate presence, inspired by her own painful lesson and by the innocent trust of a child. He continued his walk, his polished boots echoing softly on the marble floor. He passed a young intern, looking overwhelmed, hunched over a chart. Elias paused, then gently placed a hand on the intern's shoulder. Take a breath, doctor, he said, his voice kind. Remember why you're here. Remember the patient, not just the chart. The intern looked up, startled. Then a flicker of understanding and gratitude crossed his face. He nodded, a new resolve in his eyes. Elias smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. The ripple effect, he realized, was just beginning. He walked away, not with the weight of humiliation, but with the quiet strength of a man who had faced adversity, found dignity, and inspired change. The sun streamed through the lobby windows, casting long, warm shadows illuminating the path forward.